The first morning at Ridgeway High was louder than Maya expected. The hallways were alive with laughter, sneakers squeaking against polished floors, and lockers slamming shut like a rhythm only teenagers could make sense of. She stood at the entrance for a moment, taking it all in, holding her backpack close to her chest like a shield. Her mother had braided her hair that morning, tying each braid neatly with care, saying softly, "First impressions matter, sweetheart, but kindness matters more." Maya smiled at the thought, her heart steady as she walked forward into the sea of unfamiliar faces. She wasn't nervous about the classes or the teachers. She was used to starting over. What she feared most was the silence that came after introductions, the kind that made you feel like you didn't belong. As she made her way down the hall, conversations seemed to pause for a heartbeat. Some students looked at her curiously, others looked away too quickly, whispering behind cupped hands. Maya didn't need to hear the words to know what they were saying. She had seen those looks before, the mixture of curiosity, judgment, and that quiet question hidden in their eyes. Who does she think she is? Still, she smiled politely and kept walking. Her calmness wasn't forced. It came from years of learning that not everyone would understand you, and that was okay. When she entered her first class, the teacher greeted her warmly and introduced her to the students. "Everyone, this is Maya. She just moved here from the city." The word city seemed to echo, sparking more whispers. Maya took her seat near the window, where sunlight poured in, painting her desk in gold. She could feel a few eyes watching her, measuring her, but she kept her gaze outside, watching a group of sparrows flutter past. There was something peaceful about their flight. They moved together, yet each one seemed to know exactly where it was going. She admired that. At lunch, things were less peaceful. The cafeteria was filled with noise, laughter, chatter, trays clattering, yet somehow Maya's table remained silent. She sat alone, unpacking her lunch slowly, pretending not to notice the glances from a nearby group of popular students. Among them was a girl with glossy hair and sharp eyes, who seemed to lead the pack. She leaned in, whispering something that made her friends laugh, all while keeping her gaze fixed on Maya. It was a kind of attention that felt heavy, not admiration, but judgment dressed as amusement. Maya could sense it, but she refused to react. She focused on her food, her movements graceful, as if she had learned long ago that dignity didn't need an audience. By the time the final bell rang, she had already become the new girl, a label everyone knew and few wanted to get close to. But that didn't bother her. As she walked out of school, she passed the same group from the cafeteria. The leader, the girl with the glossy hair, called out mockingly, "Hey, new girl, you don't talk much, do you?" Maya stopped and turned slightly, her expression calm. "I talk when there's something worth saying," she replied softly, her tone polite but steady. For a moment, the girl didn't know how to respond. The others laughed, but Maya simply smiled, turned, and walked away. The laughter followed her for a while, but she didn't let it sink in. Her mother always said, "People who try to make you small do it because they feel small themselves." That night, Maya sat by her bedroom window, her braids loose, her thoughts quiet. She could still hear the echoes of laughter, but she also remembered the sunlight that had warmed her desk and the sparrows that had flown freely outside. She whispered to herself, "Tomorrow will be better." She didn't realize it yet, but tomorrow wouldn't just be better. It would be the beginning of something that would change everything. For now, she allowed herself a small smile, unaware that her strength, the quiet, unshakable kind, was already making an impression. While the others saw her as shy or fragile, there was a steadiness in her heart, a courage that didn't need to shout to be seen. And though the world around her didn't know it yet, Maya was about to teach them a lesson they would never forget, that kindness isn't weakness, and silence can sometimes speak louder than 1,000 voices. By the end of the week, the newness of Maya's arrival had turned into entertainment for a few cruel hearts. What started as whispers in the hallways had become full laughter behind her back. Her calmness, which once puzzled them, now annoyed them. They couldn't understand how someone so quiet could carry herself with so much grace. Every day, she walked through the halls with her head held high, greeting teachers politely, never reacting to the looks or the whispers. But for some, her quiet strength felt like defiance, and they wanted to break it. That Friday, the cafeteria was louder than usual. Students filled every table, trading jokes and gossip between bites of food. Maya sat at the corner table as always, eating slowly, a book open beside her lunch tray. She didn't notice the group of girls from across the room watching her, their leader whispering a plan that made the others giggle. Among them was the same girl who had mocked her on her first day, the one who couldn't stand the way Maya never seemed to lose her composure. "Let's see how calm she is after this," she muttered, with a smirk. Maya's notebook slipped from her lap, the pages fluttering to the floor. She bent down to pick it up, unaware that one of the girls was walking toward her with a small bottle of glue hidden behind her tray. The moment Maya leaned forward, the girl tilted the bottle, pouring the sticky liquid into her braids. It was quick, cruelly quick, and for a heartbeat, no one made a sound. Then came the laughter. Sharp, echoing, cruel laughter that filled the room like broken glass scattering across the floor. Maya froze, her hand halfway to her notebook. The smell of glue hit her first, then the cold stickiness spreading through her hair. Slowly, she reached up, her fingers brushing the thick strands, now clumped together. The laughter grew louder as phones came out, recording the moment. Some whispered, some gasped, others just watched, unsure whether to join in or look away. The cafeteria, once full of noise, turned into a strange kind of silence, the kind that isn't quiet at all but filled with tension and shame. Maya stood up slowly. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. Her face remained calm, though her heart raced in her chest. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her, waiting for her to break, waiting for her to prove that their cruelty had worked. Instead, she did something none of them expected. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, picked up her notebook, and walked out, not hurriedly, not angrily, but with quiet dignity that made even the laughter stop for a moment. Each step she took across the cafeteria floor echoed louder than their mockery. Her silence was not weakness. It was power. As she pushed open the door to the restroom, she finally let out the breath she'd been holding. Standing in front of the mirror, she saw her reflection, glue dripping through her braids, some already hardening, her eyes glistening with tears she refused to let fall. For a moment, her throat tightened. The humiliation burned deep, but beneath it, there was something stronger, resolve. She turned on the tap and began rinsing her hair, the cold water stinging her scalp. A teacher eventually entered, startled to find her there, and tried to help. But Maya only said, "It's okay, I'll be fine." Her voice was soft but steady. It was the same tone she had used all week, gentle yet unbreakable. Back in the cafeteria, the laughter had faded. The girl who poured the glue tried to act proud, but her smile faltered when she noticed the looks from others. A few students who had filmed the moment now quietly deleted their videos. Something about Maya's silence had unsettled them. They had wanted a scene, a meltdown, a reaction, but instead, they were faced with something far more powerful: grace under humiliation. By the end of the day, word spread across the school about what had happened. Some called it cruel, others called it shocking. But everyone agreed on one thing: Maya didn't cry, didn't yell, didn't run. She simply walked away like someone who knew her worth was far greater than their approval. And that quiet, dignified walk marked the beginning of a change no one saw coming, a change that would soon turn cruelty into compassion, and mockery into a lesson the entire school would never forget. Maya stood frozen in front of the restroom mirror, the fluorescent lights flickering weakly above her as the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. The mirror showed a reflection she almost didn't recognize. Her beautiful braids, once neat and soft, were now tangled and stiff with glue. The sticky substance had hardened in places, clumping the strands together until they looked like a cruel mockery of what they once were. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached up to touch her hair, and when her fingers brushed the hardened glue, tears welled up in her eyes. The sting wasn't just from the glue, it was from the humiliation, the laughter that had filled the cafeteria, the way everyone had watched but no one had spoken up for her. She could still hear the echoes of their laughter in her mind, bouncing off the cold walls of the restroom. For a long moment, she simply stood there, her reflection blurring behind her tears. It would have been easy to scream, to cry, to storm out and demand justice. It would have been easy to let anger take over. But instead, Maya took a deep, shaky breath and whispered softly to herself, "They can't take my peace." Those 5 words became her anchor. She said them again, more firmly this time, as she turned on the faucet and let the cold water run through her hands. It wasn't just glue she was trying to wash away. It was pain, anger, and humiliation. The water splashed over her hair, sticky strands pulling painfully as she worked them apart, little by little. The glue didn't come off easily. It clung stubbornly, just as the memory of laughter clung to her mind. But Maya didn't stop. Her patience was quiet, but fierce, the kind that came from someone who had faced hurt before and learned to rise from it. The more she rinsed, the calmer she became. Her tears fell silently, mixing with the water, but there was no sobbing, no despair, only quiet determination. After several minutes, the door opened softly, and the school counselor, Mrs. Hart, stepped in. She had heard whispers about what had happened and came looking for her. When she saw Maya standing by the sink, hands still working through her hair, her heart broke a little. "Oh, sweetheart," she said gently, moving closer. Maya turned, her eyes still wet but steady. "It's okay," she said quietly. "I'll be fine." Mrs. Hart handed her a towel, her voice warm and kind. "You don't have to be fine right now," she said. But Maya only smiled faintly and replied, "I do. Because if I'm not, they win." That sentence caught Mrs. Hart off guard. There was a strength in the girl's words that belonged to someone far older than her years. Together, they worked carefully, using warm water and gentle shampoo, trying to remove as much glue as they could. Some of the braids had to be cut, and with each snip, a piece of Maya's heart ached, not for her hair, but for the cruelty behind what had been done. By the time they finished, the school halls had grown quiet. Most students had gone home, unaware that in a small restroom, a young girl had just made one of the strongest choices of her life. As Maya wrapped her damaged hair in a towel, Mrs. Hart placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You didn't deserve this," she said softly. "No one does." Maya nodded, but said nothing. Deep down, she knew she had a choice, to let this moment define her, or to use it as a reason to rise higher. That afternoon, as she walked home under the golden light of the setting sun, she made her decision. She wouldn't let hate turn her bitter. She wouldn't let cruelty steal her joy. She would heal, and she would do it gracefully, because true strength wasn't about revenge. It was about keeping your kindness intact, even when the world tried to break it. When Maya got home, her mother opened the door and gasped at her hair, but before she could speak, Maya smiled faintly and said, "It's just glue. Mama, it'll wash away." Her mother's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't press further. That night, as Maya sat in front of her mirror again, combing through what was left of her braids, she realized something powerful. They could ruin her hair, but not her heart. And with that quiet understanding, she felt the weight on her chest begin to lift. Tomorrow would be another day, and she was determined that no matter what they did, she would walk into that school again with her head held high, because the only thing stronger than hate is the strength to choose peace. The next morning, the sky was clear, and sunlight streamed through the school windows. touching the hallways with soft gold. But whispers still floated through the air, whispers about what had happened in the cafeteria, about the glue, the laughter, and the girl who never cried. Everyone expected Maya to stay home after that day, to disappear quietly and never come back. Even the teachers spoke in hushed tones, wondering if she'd return. But just before the first bell rang, the hallway fell silent. Maya walked through the main doors, her steps calm, her shoulders straight. Her long braids were gone, replaced by a bright scarf wrapped around her head, patterned in shades of red and gold that caught the light and shimmered as she moved. It wasn't just a scarf, it was a crown. Her presence carried a quiet strength that made even the loudest students stop and stare. Some looked guilty, others curious. The bullies, the same girls who had poured glue into her hair, froze when they saw her walking toward them. They exchanged uneasy glances, expecting a confrontation, maybe even a teacher behind her, ready to punish them. But Maya didn't bring anger with her. She brought something far more powerful. As she reached them, the hallway seemed to hold its breath. Her expression was calm, her eyes soft but steady. She stood there for a moment, looking at each of them, not with hate, not even with disappointment, but with quiet understanding. Then she smiled gently and said 3 simple words, "I forgive you." The sound of those words hit harder than any shout could have. The girls blinked, unsure if they had heard her correctly. Forgiveness was not what they expected. They had prepared for anger, insults, maybe even tears, but forgiveness. That was something none of them knew how to face. The leader of the group, who had been so confident before, opened her mouth to speak, but couldn't find the words. The others shifted uncomfortably, their laughter from the day before now, a heavy silence between them. Maya didn't wait for a reply. She simply smiled again and walked past them, her bright scarf glowing in the sunlight, like a symbol of everything they could never take from her. Her dignity, her peace, her strength. All day long people watched her. Some whispered behind her back still, but it wasn't the same kind of whisper. It was quieter, uncertain, touched with respect. Teachers noticed the scarf, the calmness in her walk, the way she still raised her hand politely in class and treated everyone with kindness, as if nothing had happened. The bullies tried to go back to pretending they didn't care, but every time they saw her, guilt twisted inside them. Forgiveness wasn't supposed to feel like that. It wasn't supposed to make you question yourself. But Maya's words wouldn't leave their minds. Later that afternoon, when the school library grew quiet, one of the girls from the group walked in hesitantly. She found Maya sitting by a window, reading, her scarf still wrapped neatly around her head. The sunlight touched her face as she turned the pages slowly, completely at peace. The girl stood there for a while, before finally whispering, "Why didn't you tell on us?" Her voice trembled slightly, not out of fear of punishment, but out of confusion. Maya looked up, her eyes warm and kind, and after a moment, she said softly, "Because what you did says more about your pain than about me." The girl frowned, trying to understand. "Our pain?" she asked. Maya nodded. "People who hurt others are often hurting inside too. If I hate you back, that pain wins. But if I forgive you, maybe we both get a chance to heal." The girl didn't know what to say. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. She looked down at the floor, feeling shame rise in her chest, but also something else, a strange, heavy gratitude. Maya smiled again, not out of pride, but out of peace. It wasn't about being better than them. It was about being free. When the girl walked out of the library, she didn't return to her group. She just sat quietly in class, her mind replaying Maya's words over and over. That night, when Maya returned home, her mother noticed how calm she seemed. "Did anyone say anything?" she asked carefully. Maya shook her head and smiled. "No, Mama," she said softly. They listened. And indeed, the next morning, when she walked through the same halls again, the whispers had stopped. People didn't laugh anymore. Some even smiled at her as she passed. The bullies didn't speak, but they didn't mock her either. Forgiveness had done what anger never could. It had changed hearts. And Maya, the girl they once tried to humiliate, had become something far greater than they could ever imagine, a quiet symbol of strength that no cruelty could break. The story of Maya's forgiveness spread faster than gossip ever could. Within days, almost everyone in school had heard what happened, not the cruel prank itself, but what she did afterward. Students whispered in the hallways, but now it wasn't mockery. It was awe. "Did you hear what she said?" one would ask. "She forgave them," another replied, shaking their head in disbelief. It was something so simple, yet so powerful, that it unsettled people in ways detention or punishment never could. Even the teachers noticed the change. Some who had ignored the bullying before now found themselves stopping to speak about kindness and respect in their classes. The principal, after hearing the full story from the counselor, decided to address it at the next assembly. She didn't mention names, but everyone knew who she meant when she said, "Real strength doesn't come from fighting back. It comes from knowing who you are and choosing peace." For the bullies, the days that followed were harder than any suspension. Their laughter had disappeared, replaced by silence and guilt. Each time they saw Maya walking down the hallway with her head high, wrapped in her bright scarf, they felt smaller. The leader of the group, who had once been so proud of her cruel act, began avoiding eye contact altogether. It wasn't because Maya had humiliated her, it was because she hadn't. Forgiveness had stripped away her power. When hate is met with hate, it feeds itself. But when hate meets grace, it starves. Slowly, that truth began to sink in. Students who once sat silently during bullying started stepping in when they saw it happen again. "Stop," they'd say now, their voices uncertain but growing stronger. "That's not cool." The atmosphere of the school began to shift. It wasn't an overnight miracle, change never is, but something real had begun. Teachers noticed students being kinder, helping one another more. Even lunchtime felt different. Laughter returned, but it wasn't cruel anymore. The principal decided that what happened to Maya should not be forgotten. She and the teachers created a new event, Kindness Week, a time when students were encouraged to show compassion through small acts, helping a classmate, writing a kind note, or sitting with someone new at lunch. They hung posters with quotes about empathy and courage, but one stood out above all others. In bold letters, it read, "Forgiveness is not weakness. It's how the strong choose peace." Maya never asked for the attention. She didn't want to be remembered as the girl from the glue incident. She only wanted to move on quietly, but she couldn't stop what her story had become, a lesson that spread far beyond the walls of the school. Her classmates began to treat her differently, not with pity, but with genuine respect. The same girls who once laughed now went out of their way to greet her, to show kindness not out of guilt, but because they were learning. One afternoon, one of them found her in the library again and said softly, "You made me think about the kind of person I want to be." Maya smiled and replied, "Then something good came out of it." Months passed, and when new students joined the school, they would hear the story whispered like a legend. "That's the school," someone would say, "where a girl turned glue and humiliation into forgiveness and strength." It became a reminder that one person's choice could change an entire community. And every year, during Kindness Week, Maya's story was shared again, not to shame the past, but to celebrate growth. Posters went up with her favorite quote. Teachers told students about the power of grace, and the once ordinary cafeteria became a place of laughter and friendship. Maya never sought revenge. She never demanded apologies. Her power came from her peace. Years later, when she had long graduated, the story remained, told by teachers, remembered by students, and passed on like a quiet flame that refused to die out. Forgiveness had done what punishment never could. It had transformed hearts. And in the end, Maya's greatest lesson wasn't about what others did to her, but about how she chose to respond. Because sometimes, the most extraordinary change begins with the simplest act. Choosing kindness when the world expects anger, and turning pain into something that makes others better. Maya did that, and her school, her world, was never the same again.